Hello, I'm Saddam Hussein, and I would like to share my story with you. I was born into the harsh sun and the arid winds of Tikrit, a town perched on the banks of the mighty Tigris River in April 1937. My birth came into a world where the clamor of political upheaval and social unrest echoed across the land. Iraq was no stranger to conflict, and our family, being of humble Bedouin origins, were perpetually swept up in the storm of adversity that befell our nation. My father abandoned us before I even had the chance to meet him, disappearing into the abyss of the unknown, leaving my mother Subha to bear the burdens of impending parenthood alone. But tragedy further seeped into our lives when she lost her older son from her previous marriage. My arrival was under the shroud of grief, as I came into a world that was already tainted with loss and despair. In those early days, my mother, swallowed by sorrow, couldn't find it within herself to nurture me, and so I was sent to my maternal uncle, Khairallah Tolfa, whose rough yet unswerving hand shaped the early years of my life. Uncle Tolfa was a vocal critic of the British and an ardent nationalist. His passionate rhetoric against imperialism and his vociferous pursuit of Arab nationalism embedded a fervent seed within me. The hardships were aplenty, and luxury was a word unknown to me. We were bound by the simplistic rhythms of rural life, and yet amidst the barren lands of Tikrit, my ambitions, paradoxically, found fertile ground to sprout. It was in this harsh environment that the foundations of my resilience and unyielding determination were laid. As a teenager, the pulse of political rebellion coursed through my veins, and my uncle's influence charted my early encounters with activism. I was a mere 20 years old when I first stepped into the covert world of underground resistance, joining the Arab Ba'ath Socialist Party. This step marked the beginning of my journey amidst the shadowy realms of political dissent and rebellion. In the clandestine circles of the Arab Ba'ath Socialist Party, I found a vessel for my growing political aspirations and unbridled fervor for a unified Arab nation. My young heart, already touched by the personal and collective sufferings of my people, saw the promise of power as the only route to make tangible changes in a fractured society. My early days in the party were a maelstrom of revolutionary fervency and underground operations against the then-established Iraqi government. My comrades and I envisioned an Iraq free from foreign intervention, an Iraq that stood as a bastion of Arab solidarity and nationalism. Our covert endeavors were relentless, as we sought to undermine the imperialist influences that have long dictated the fate of our beloved nation. But our fight was not without cost. The path to revolution was painted with danger at every corner. My associates and I were subjected to persecution, our activities casting us into a dangerous game of cat and mouse with the authorities. It was a perilous existence, yet my resolve did not waver, for the seeds of rebellion had firmly taken root. The echelons of power were seductive, yet elusive, guarded by formidable barriers that were not easily shattered. In 1959, at a time when my youth was still very much a part of me, I became entwined in a hazardous plot aimed to assassinate Abd al-Karim Qasim, the then ruler of Iraq, a man whose policies and governance stood as a blockade to our visions of a truly sovereign and united Arab state. The failed assassination attempt was a moment of reckoning, a juncture at which the ferocity of my ambitions was met with the brutal reality of political struggle. I was wounded, both physically and in spirit, yet amidst the blood and pain, my determination did not perish. Fleeing to Syria and later to Egypt, I sought refuge amidst fellow Baathists, my spirit undeterred, my vision for Iraq unclouded. Even in exile, My connection to the turbulent winds of Iraq's political landscape never waned. Letters, covert communications, and shrouded meetings kept me woven into the tapestry of our underground resistance, planning and plotting for the day when the tides would turn in our favor. The years in exile were as formative as they were excruciating, shaping my ideological framework and refining my strategic acumen. The political circles in Cairo offered a different perspective, and the cadence of revolutionary talk filled the air in those hidden rooms where we congregated. I was ensconced in a sanctuary of like-minded spirits, all of us united by a collective vision of liberating our lands from the chains of oppression and foreign dominance. Each day in Egypt was both a bitter reminder of my separation from my homeland and a step forward in my political and ideological education. My eyes were perpetually set towards Iraq, waiting, anticipating the moment when circumstances would pivot in our favor. That moment came in 1963, when a coup in Iraq echoed the unyielding cries for change and upheaval. The Ba'ath Party had momentarily grasped the reins of power, and I, without hesitation, left the cobblestone streets of Cairo to navigate the treacherous and shifting sands of Iraqi politics. Yet power is an elusive mistress, and our initial grasp on governance in Iraq slipped away as quickly as it had come. A mere 9 months after tasting authority, we were thrust back into the shadows, the victim of yet another coup. A stark reminder that the path to sustained power is labyrinthine and fraught with peril. These shifts in power, the interplay of loyalty and betrayal, and the volatile nature of political alliances imprinted upon me an invaluable lesson in trust and strategy. My dreams for Iraq were unwavering, yet I knew that the manifestation of those dreams demanded a shrewd, meticulous, and often brutal approach. The struggle intensified, both within the corridors of covert political assemblies and on the streets of Iraq, where ideological factions battled for the soul of the nation. I immersed myself in this struggle, biding my time, weaving through the intricate web of political maneuvering and solidifying my status within the Ba'ath Party. 1968 was a watershed year in the annals of Iraq's history, and notably in my own personal trajectory. The Ba'ath Party had wrestled control once more, yet this time our approach to governance and power was more measured, deliberate, and decidedly iron-fisted. My comrades and I were no strangers to the vagaries of political power, having been tossed into the abyss of opposition before. Thus the lessons of the past became the principles of our new reign, ensuring that every step taken was calculative, every decision made was precise, and every potential threat was meticulously mitigated. Under the ostensible leadership of President Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, my cousin and trusted ally, I assumed the role of Vice President and Deputy Chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council. It was a position that might have appeared secondary, yet afforded me an unbridled control over the integral apparatus of the state, notably the security and intelligence sectors. The intricacies of power were manifold, and my hands were immersed in the webs of governance, security, and foreign policy. My role demanded an astute manipulation of the levers of power, ensuring that every cog in the machinery of the state operated in synchrony with our vision and interests. The formidable shadow of our party loomed across Iraq, and I, from the obscurity of my position, orchestrated a symphony of governance and control. My fingers pulsed with the heartbeat of Iraq, feeling its rhythms, its trembles of discontent, and its pulsating aspirations. My ascent to the zenith of power, though shrouded in the cloaks of deputy positions, was anything but inconspicuous to those who dared to peer into the abyss of our governance. From the initiation of socio-economic reforms to the implementation of agrarian policies, I meticulously wove the tapestry of a new Iraq, all while the echo of dissent was systematically silenced. Through the 1970s, my influence permeated every sinew of the Iraqi state. Each strategic decision, each alliance forged, and each opposition quelled bore the indelible mark of my hand. My path, though layered with strategic alliances and tactical friendships, was undistractedly singular in its pursuit of an Iraq that stood unyielding against external influences and internal dissent. As the years ebbed forward, my influence seeped into every pore of Iraq's existence. Although President al-Bakr was ostensibly the leader, those within the corridors of power felt my presence and understood where the true epicenter of authority lay. My vision for Iraq was grandiose, yet pragmatically tethered to the geopolitical realities of our region. Iran, with its revolutionary zeal post-1979, posed an existential threat to the Ba'athist establishment and to Iraq's territorial integrity. In my calculations, it was a threat that required both a strategic and combative response. My consolidation of power culminated in 1979, a year that witnessed a cascade of calculated eliminations and strategic power moves that enhanced my grip on Iraq's destiny. President al-Bakr, wearied by age and politics, resigned, and I, with an insatiable appetite for control and a vision for a dominant Iraq, ascended to the presidency. My inauguration was as much a display of power as it was a warning to those who dared to dissent. The infamous purge of the Ba'ath Party leadership, conducted with a calculated brutality, not only solidified my reign, but also sent an unambiguous message across the echelons of power in Iraq. It was clear loyalty was paramount, and dissent would not be tolerated. As I settled into the realms of a leadership, my eyes veered towards the tumultuous East, towards Iran, where the Islamic Revolution had unseated the Shah and propelled Ayatollah Khomeini into power. The ideological and territorial threats posed by this new Iran were palpable, and my decision to engage militarily in 1980 was as much a defensive act as it was an offensive strategy to undermine a regional rival. The Iran-Iraq War, which raged for almost a decade, was a testament to my resolve to safeguard Iraq against external threats, even while the internal machinations of my government worked tirelessly to quell any whispers of opposition. The battles fought on those desolate plains were not just between armies, but between ideologies, between two nations that glared at each other across a chasm of mistrust and animosity. In the ashen fields and bloody rivers between Iraq and Iran, the mettle of our nation was tested. It was an exhaustive tug-of-war, where gains were measured not only in territories reclaimed, but also in the assertion of ideological resistance against Persian and Shiite expansionism. Throughout the war, the world watched, often extending a clandestine hand towards our efforts. The alignment of global powers was not necessarily in overt support of our cause, but rather driven by an apprehension of the burgeoning revolutionary fervor emanating from Tehran. Our struggle was arduous, as the war took a devastating toll on our people, our economy, and our international standing. Yet beneath the surface, a complex network of alliances and enmities was being weaved on the international stage as nations near and far calculated their involvements and stands based on strategic interests. When the war finally ground to a tumultuous halt in 1988, Iraq emerged both battered and emboldened. We had withstood the Iranian onslaught and in many ways curbed the expansionist aspirations of the revolutionary regime to our east. Yet the fires of conflict did not recede with the cessation of hostilities with Iran. Our nation, bled dry by years of conflict and strangled by economic challenges, cast its eyes southward towards the oil-rich lands of Kuwait. To the west, our relationship with the United States, who once perceived us as a bulwark against Iranian expansionism, became complex and multifaceted, entwining geopolitics with economic interests and ideological stances. The invasion of Kuwait in 1990 was not merely an act of aggression, as perceived by many across the globe, but a calculated strategic move aimed at both securing economic stability and asserting regional dominance. Yet, it also propelled Iraq into the international limelight, igniting a firestorm of international condemnation and military opposition. In the ensuing Gulf War, Iraq found itself isolated and embattled, facing a coalition of forces that stretched across the globe. The bombs that rained upon Baghdad were not merely physical manifestations of destruction, but symbolic representations of the perils that come with challenging the existing global order. The crucible of the Gulf War was a defining epoch, not only for Iraq, but also in elucidating the very nature of global power dynamics. The infernos that lit the skies above our lands were a manifestation of not merely a confrontation against Iraq, but against a world order that would brook no challenge. The skirmish on the battlefield was overshadowed by a larger spectacle, a struggle between unilateral boldness and collective condemnation, between a singular vision of regional recalibration and an international alliance determined to preserve established norms. The ceasefires of 1991, though veiling an ambiance of temporal calm, concealed the smoldering embers of ongoing conflict. Iraq, resilient yet marred by the devastations of war and subsequent economic sanctions, entered a period of international isolation and internal strife. My leadership, steadfast in the face of these tribulations, sought to navigate through this tumultuous period by bolstering our defenses and maintaining an unyielding stance against both overt and covert threats. The autonomous regions of Kurdistan, in the north of our sovereign boundaries, became a crucible of both rebellion and international meddling. It was evident that our actions on the international stage, particularly in Kuwait, had pivoted the geopolitical dynamics of the region. The United States, with its ever-expanding influence and interest in the Middle East, viewed Iraq through a lens tinted with both strategic interest and ideological aversion. Sanctions, no-fly zones, and covert operations, we found ourselves ensnared in a complex web of international constraints and subversions. Despite the efforts of external powers to undermine our sovereignty, the edifice of our governance remained externally stout, yet internally grappling with dissent and economic tribulations. Our engagement with the international community during this period was punctuated by a dichotomy of resistance and strategic cooperation. While we adhered to a degree to international mandates and inspections, our resolve to preserve and protect the sovereignty and interests of Iraq remained undeterred. Through the lens of the West, particularly the United States, our administration was perceived as a cog in the so-called axis of evil, an embodiment of a threat that extended beyond our borders. Yet, from within the walls of my palaces, these assertions were viewed as hypocritical emanations from nations that, while condemning our actions, themselves engaged in acts of aggression and subversion across the globe. The winds of change were subtly weaving through the corridors of power across the world as the dawn of a new millennium approached. The geopolitical dynamics were gradually shifting as the relentless whispers of threat and conspiracy permeated through the global discourse. From the ramparts of our bastions in Baghdad, the echoes of distant drums of war began to reverberate. Softly at first, then gradually amplifying into a cacophony that threatened to engulf the cradle of civilization in its maelstrom. The specters of the previous conflicts, particularly our embroilment in Kuwait, haunted our international relations, casting a shadow upon Iraq's standing amidst the global community. However, it was an incident far removed from our deserts and rivers that would set the stage for the impending tempest. The tragic events of September 11th, 2001 in the United States. The malevolent act of terror on American soil reshaped the international landscape. The tragedy refracted through the lens of American politics, foreign policy, and subsequently, the geopolitics of the entire Middle East. Though Iraq had no connection to the atrocious acts perpetrated by Al-Qaeda, the ripples from the impact extended far beyond the perpetrators and their hideouts in Afghanistan. The United States, under the leadership of President George W. Bush, galvanized its power and resources, embarking upon a global war on terror. Ostensibly, this initiative sought to eliminate threats of terrorism, yet it also afforded a convenient pretext to address other, arguably unrelated, geopolitical and strategic interests. Our nation, rich in history and replete with the black gold that fuels the modern world, found itself squarely within the crosshairs of this new American endeavor. The accusations were grave, allegations of harboring weapons of mass destruction, supporting terrorism, and oppressing our own people. The crescendo of accusations, denouncements, and threats against us reached a fever pitch, and the once distant drums of war were now an imminent thunder rolling across the desert sands. Diplomacy, subterfuge, and manipulation converged into a maelstrom of international tension, as America, with its coalition of allies, sought to weave a narrative that justified their impending incursion into our sovereign lands. It was a tense time, wherein each decision, statement, and action was charged with the potential to either stave off or ignite a conflict that threatened it to consume. Not only Iraq, but the entire region. In this looming confrontation, one truth remained self-evident. Iraq, once a bystander in the tragedy of distant lands, was now poised to become the next battleground in a global struggle that transcended borders and ideologies. The tempest unfurled its wrath upon our lands in the early spring of 2003. As the first rays of sunlight crept across the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates, the once distant thunder of conflict erupted into a storm of steel and fire that engulfed our ancient lands. Operation Iraqi Freedom, a moniker bestowed by those who sought to topple our regime, was unleashed with a ferocity and scale that dwarfed the previous confrontations of our time. The initial salvo, known to the world as shock and awe, rained down upon our cities, seeking to cripple our defenses and break our resolve. As the cascades of explosions illuminated the night sky above Baghdad, casting shadows amidst the twisted columns of smoke and fire, the magnitude of the impending struggle took form. The invaders approached from the south, their sights set on our capital, with legions of soldiers, machines of war, and a resolve fortified by distant masters. Our soldiers, sons of Iraq, stood firm against the tide, their spirit unbroken amidst the storm. In the south, the city of Basra became an early crucible of conflict as our forces sought to repel the invaders amidst the shattered remnants of the city's once proud edifices. The fighting was fierce, with both sides entwined in a deadly embrace that left no quarter for retreat or remorse. The American and British forces, bolstered by their alliance and superior technology, pressed onwards, their path marred by the scarred landscapes of conflict and the echoes of distant anguish. And despite our steadfast resistance, the coalition's relentless march towards Baghdad continued, their progress an ever-present specter upon the horizon. Yet it was not merely in the physical realm wherein the battle was fought. A parallel confrontation was being waged, one of narratives, perceptions, and moral standing. The invaders sought to portray their endeavor as a liberation and altruistic intervention to free the Iraqi people from tyranny and oppression. We, the government, the soldiers, and many of the people of Iraq beheld it differently. This was our land, cradle of civilizations, and the storm that now swept through our cities and across our plains was perceived as an unwarranted assault upon our sovereignty, our legacy, and our future. The walls of Baghdad, which had withstood the test of time and conflict, now braced for the encroaching maelstrom. As the invaders approached the city, a vibrant tapestry of history, culture, and life teetered on the brink of a new epoch, one that threatened to unravel the threads that had bound the Iraqi people together for generations. The conflagration consumed the cities and deserts alike, as the coalition forces pressed onwards towards the heart of our nation, Baghdad. Every explosion, each report of gunfire echoed like a distant drum, signaling both an ending and an unwanted beginning. As the days turned to weeks, the sand beneath our feet was stained with the blood of Iraqis and foreigners alike, testament to a conflict that was both of our time and timeless, modern yet ancient in its wrath and sorrow. The clashing of arms, ideology, and ambition resonated through the dust-filled air as our forces grappled with the coalition amidst the dunes, streets, and alleys. Baghdad, our cherished jewel upon the Tigris, transformed into a citadel of defiance and despair. The walls and streets which once resonated with the echoes of commerce, dialogue, and life, now shuddered under the weight of conflict, reverberating with the cacophony of battle. Within these historic avenues, our soldiers, outnumbered and outgunned, yet undeterred, held the line against the encroaching tempest. Tanks rolled through the shattered remnants of our defenses, and foreign soldiers tread upon the soil of our ancestors, beneath the watchful eyes of centuries of history and heritage. The invasion was rapid, yet the days stretched endlessly for those ensnared in the conflict. I, who once held the reins of power with unwavering resolve, was now rendered a spectator, concealed amidst the chaos, as my nation was dissected by foreign hands. Upon the precipice of occupation, our regime, once an unassailable fortress, began to crumble beneath the might of the coalition and the internal fissures that had long threaded through our governance and society. Officers, soldiers, and citizens, faced with an unimaginable future, were pressed into decisions of survival, resistance, or reluctant cooperation with the invaders. The US-led coalition declared the end of major combat operations on May 1, 2003, with President George W. Bush announcing the infamous words, "Mission accomplished," against the backdrop of the vast and unforgiving sea. However, for the people of Iraq, it marked the unfolding of a new chapter, one mired in instability, insurgency, and the intricate quandaries of a nation rediscovering its identity amidst the embers of conflict. In those days of tumult, as the statues fell and the foreign banners unfurled beneath the Iraqi sun, the lines between ally and adversary, liberator and occupier, were blurred beneath the veil of uncertainty and shifting allegiances. Iraq, a nation of boundless history and potential, now navigated the precarious path between past and future, sovereignty and occupation, chaos and order. amidst the rubble and within the shadows of a nation besieged. The semblance of my regime, once a formidable pillar upon the Middle Eastern stage, waned beneath the formidable weight of foreign occupation and internal strife. The echo of boots through the ravaged streets of Baghdad, the distant murmurs of dissent and anguish from the populace, and the concealed gatherings of those who once wielded power within my administration marked the clandestine epilogue of my rule. For me, the demise was neither immediate nor transparent. The clandestine corridors of resistance offered both sanctuary and a veneer of imperceptible influence as the coalition forces sought to dismantle the remnants of our governance. My physical absence from the public eye did little to quell the specter of my influence, which permeated through the subsequent insurgency and resistance. The Americans and their allies, whilst imposing their military and ideological might upon our lands, were besieged by the complex tapestry of Iraqi society, wherein the threads of loyalty, fear, defiance, and ambition were interwoven within every faction, tribe, and individual. The narrative of my capture was to become a symbol of both my fall and a catalyst for the ensuing struggle that would entangle Iraq. Found concealed within a modest subterranean refuge near Tikrit in December of 2003, I, the once unassailable leader of Iraq, was paraded before the world, a physical embodiment of a fallen regime and a token of victory for the coalition. My deposition, however, did little to quell the embers of conflict that smoldered beneath the surface of occupied Iraq. The power vacuum that ensued became a cauldron wherein various entities, both domestic and foreign, sought to impose, negotiate, and vie for influence and control. The complexities of the Shia and Sunni, Kurd and Arab, Islamist and secularist, intertwined with the foreign influence of neighboring powers and the omnipresent occupation forces, presented a multifaceted struggle that extended far beyond the singular narrative of my reign and fall. Whilst I faced trial and ultimate execution, the land upon which I had forged my legacy grappled with the convolutions of rebirth, retribution, and reconciliation. My voice, though physically silenced by the hangman's noose in December 2006, lingered as a spectral refrain within the subsequent trajectory of Iraq. The realms of moral, ethical, and temporal judgment were transcended as my corporeal existence was extinguished, surrendering to an eternity wherein the deeds, misdeeds, and undulating ripples emanating from my temporal journey were to be perpetually dissected, analyzed, and judged. The narratives, eternally bound to the perceptions, ideologies, and objectives of the beholder, oscillated between the realms of tyrant and liberator, oppressor and leader, villain and hero. The Iraq that unfurled in the aftermath of my demise, bathed in the afterglows of liberation and the shadows of chaos, instability, and perpetual conflict, reflected the profound complexities, challenges, and eternal struggles inherent within the endeavors of governance, coexistence, and the pursuit of prosperity and justice within a realm as diverse, rich, and turbulent as our beloved Mesopotamia. In the silence that ensued, as the echoes of the past were gradually absorbed within the boundless expanses of history, the eternal tapestry of Iraq, enriched, tainted, and perpetually forged amidst the triumphs, tragedies, loves, and losses of countless generations, persisted, forever undulating amidst the cosmic river of time.